David from San Leandro, California. I was listening to Conrad and JR's latest podcast, and Jim Ross said that Steve Austin refused to work with Marc Mero at Madison Square Garden the night of the curtain call. This is not the first time I've heard Austin refusing to work with another talent and putting them over. I've heard stories about Triple H, The Rock, Billy Gunn, and Jeff Jarrett, among others. Top guys like Hulk Hogan and Shawn Michaels had the bad reputation of not putting others over and would get called out for it. I'm a huge Austin fan, but feel he gets a pass for this from fans and other wrestlers. Do you think my assessment is far off? Or do you agree that Steve Austin tends to get a free pass for this? Hopefully I am making sense. I've gotten little to no sleep since my wife and I are expecting our new baby boy to arrive soon. Well, congrats on the new baby. I'm not sure if he's arrived yet or not, but you'll be having many more sleepless nights, I can promise you that. And yeah, I think he does get something of a free pass from people who criticize other names, like the ones you mentioned, without ever mentioning Austin. I think that's fair, but I got to correct you. Are you sure that he was referring to the night of the curtain call? Because to me, that really wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, Austin worked with Marc Mero at the King of the Ring the following month. Actually, I think he had another match with him on the following pay-per-view, the International Incident show in July. So they worked together quite a bit around that time in the middle of '96. He had just started with the Stone Cold name. He just switched over to the Stone Cold name around that same time. I don't think Austin at that point was in any position to dictate who he would and would not face. I thought the story was that he got to the building one night at a live event while he was the champion. So this would have been in '98. And he found out that he was working a match in the middle of the show with Marc Mero. And this would have been, I want to say a week or so after Sable had given Mero the Sable bomb on TV, which killed his career dead at that point. Austin saw it the same way. And he got to the building and he sees that he's working with Mero. And in the middle of the show, no less, supposedly because they wanted to, give him time to leave early to get to wherever the TV taping was the next day or whenever it was. Jim Cornette tells the story actually in one of his timeline shoots. Austin was supposed to wrestle Mero, again, the week after, and he's basically said, nope, that's not happening. He got powerbombed by a 100-pound woman on TV. Why am I wasting my time with this guy? And the match never happened. And you know what? He was right. He was right. That match should not have been anything but kick, wham, stunner in about 10 seconds. Stone Cold getting... here's the thing, the idea that Marc Mero is going to be powerbombed, let himself be powerbombed by Sable. And it's not like Sable was like this great women's athlete, like she was Ronda Rousey or somebody like that. She wasn't. And she was 110 pounds soaking wet. And he let her powerbomb him on television in front of the world. And Sable, she was a huge star. She ended up being a huge star and everything. But, the idea that Stone Cold, as hot as he was at that time, if we're talking about '98, would have said, okay, yeah, I'll work with Marc Mero, and it was going to be anything other than like a 5 or 10 second squash. He's kind of right. He really didn't have any business being in the ring with this guy and selling rest hold submissions from the guy who got powerbombed by Sable. It would have been a dumb idea. But still, it's what his boss wanted, and he refused. It's not like Vince McMahon was saying, I want Austin to work with Mero and put him over. I mean, then I would have walked out. If I were, and Stone Cold has a history of doing that. But yeah, so at the end of the day, though, I mean, he was told to do something and he refused. And he also didn't want to work with Jeff Jarrett for any number of reasons that have been cited over the years, some by Austin himself. But there are a lot of people who believe it had to do with heat that he still had with Jeff and his father from the crappy payoffs that he got when he worked for them in Memphis. He was getting paid so little that he was, barely eating, and it was ridiculous. At the same time, Jeff was the promoter's son. He didn't have to go through those same struggles. And so there's a lot of people who feel Austin never forgot that, and he still harbored a lot of heat and a lot of ill will towards Jeff and his family for those days. But there's also a few other things you got to remember here. And Austin, these are the ones Austin himself has talked about. When Jeff came back to WWE in 1997, he came out, he did that worked shoot promo on Raw, right? He was in his... It was like a beige blazer or something, ponytail. He comes out there and he's cutting this work shoot promo on a bunch of different people, including Austin. And he goes off on the Austin 316 catchphrase, and he says it's blasphemous what this guy is doing, and he's selling merchandise and making money off this stuff that has 316 on it. And nobody told Austin that Jarrett was going to say this. So Austin's hearing this for the first time in the back as this guy, his first night in, who he already probably doesn't like, is calling him out and calling his catchphrase and his merchandise blasphemous. And so Austin is pissed off, and he's waiting there. And as soon as Jeff comes back through the curtain, again, first night back, he pissed off Steve Austin. Austin corners him and says, look, that's my merch money that you're putting at risk there with those comments. And he was not happy about that. So there's that. And, he just didn't think Jeff was a big enough star. So he just outright refused to work with Jeff Jarrett whenever it came up. And I think Russo wanted to do something with him and Austin sometime in the summer of '99. Russo was always a big fan of Jeff. Even it carried over even into WCW where he put the championship on him. And then Russo, of course, also worked for Jarrett for a time in TNA. So there was always a friendship there between Russo and Jarrett. But Austin just outright said, I am not working with this guy. Plain and simple. So that's another example. There's, of course, the famous night that Austin walked out in 2002 when Vince McMahon had told him they wanted him to do the job for Brock Lesnar in a King of the Ring qualifying match on Raw. Austin was already fed up with creative at that point, and he had other issues in his life going on. He's talked about this before. His head was not in the best place. But then he was being asked to lose to the new guy in a Raw match with no promotion. And when that happened and he couldn't change Vince's mind, he said, well, I'm not doing it. He took his bag and he went home. And look, another situation where I can't say that I blame Austin for feeling that way and for being upset, because it really was a stupid idea. To blow the first Stone Cold Brock Lesnar match unannounced as a qualifying match on Monday Night Raw, that's a pretty stupid idea. But they were all in on Brock Lesnar at the time and building him up. I mean, they did have Hogan lose to him on TV before SummerSlam. And then, of course, Hogan had this thought in his head that, well, I'll lose to Brock as long as I can come back at Survivor Series at Madison Square Garden and win the championship from him. And there's no fucking way that was happening. So that's why Hogan went away and didn't come back until the following year. There's always got to be something in it for these guys. Hogan did the job, but there was a catch. And when he didn't get what he wanted, he went home. He didn't come back until, well, I guess it was until February of the following year is when he came back and he wrestled Rock and then he wrestled Vince at WrestleMania. So that was a stupid idea. Austin has admitted that walking out the way he did was really dumb. It was the worst professional mistake he's ever made in his life. He lost a lot of money. And even when he came back to WWE, Vince McMahon said, look, I have to fine you. I can't just have people walking out and not paying a price for it. And Austin was, they talked about this when McMahon was on the Stone Cold podcast. And Austin said, well, shit, son, what are you going to fine me? What do you think is the number? And Vince said $650,000. Austin said, God damn, that's a lot of money. And I think he countered with maybe $250,000, and I think the fine ended up being $250,000. That's a lot of money out of Austin's pocket. So he looks back on that and says that was the biggest mistake I ever made. But at the same time, he ain't wrong in thinking that was a really dumb idea. The stories of him not wanting to put over Triple H at SummerSlam in '99. So, he lost to Mick Foley. They made it a triple threat and he lost to Mick Foley instead, who then dropped the title to Triple H the next night. I think that honestly had more to do with not having the governor of the state, who happened to also be the referee that night, Jesse Ventura, raise the hand of the heel. Even though Jesse was a heel for, all of his in-ring career pretty much. But he was the governor of the state. They didn't want to end on a sour note like that. And so they had Foley win. And instead they used him as a transitional champion to get the belt onto Triple H 24 hours later. I mean, look, Austin lost to Triple H 2 months later. They had a No Mercy pay-per-view. They had a one-on-one match. It wasn't even a triple threat. This was one-on-one. And he pinned Steve Austin. So it's not as though, I don't necessarily buy into that whole story that Austin didn't want to do the job for Triple H. Well, then what the hell happened in those 2 months after SummerSlam that changed so much that all of a sudden Austin agreed to do a singles job to Triple H. It doesn't make sense. So I tend to buy more into the Ventura story as being why they did what they did, and not being a case where Austin refused to put anybody over. I don't really buy into that. But look, did Austin look out for himself like those other guys did? Of course he did. Absolutely. Hell yes. He was protecting his spot. He was paranoid. By his own admission, he was a very paranoid person back then. Put yourself in his position. You're the top guy in the business. There was nobody for that brief stretch hotter than Stone Cold Steve Austin. And so you're thinking, there's going to be people left and right looking to knock me off my perch here. He was paranoid. But when you're as hot as he was at that time, you can do that sort of thing, I guess. And people tend to be a lot more forgiving, which is why people tend to give him a pass. But you're right.